All right, good afternoon, everyone, or morning. I suppose it's still the morning. Welcome to our FY27 How to Apply webinar for the Grants for Organizations program, specifically looking at the intent to apply application. If I haven't met you before, my name is Laura Weiss. I am a program director here at the Maryland State Arts Council, and I am joined by my co-program director, Emily Sollenberger. Together, we oversee the Grants for Organizations program. We call that GFO for short. You're going to hear that a lot today. We have a lot of information to go through today. We are holding this space for 90 minutes to go through the intent to apply application and also the process that we've gone through for the Grants for Organizations program. So we're going to outline that entire process and share what that looks like now with you. Just a couple of things before we get started here. If you're not familiar with Google Meet, this is just a reference shot of where things are located. A couple of things just to point out, be aware of the microphone, which it should be a button kind of towards the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Like I said earlier, we do ask that you remain on mute during the presentation, just so we can avoid kind of background noise or anything like that. We're going to ask that you hold all questions until the very end of the presentation, just because there's so much to get through and a lot of the pieces build on one another. So your questions might be answered throughout the presentation. But of course, once we get to those questions, you can come off mute so we can hear you. The camera is next to that. You can feel free to be on or off camera, however you are comfortable. There's also the closed captioning available, the little CC in the box. Just note that this is computer generated, but it is available if you would like to use it. Also, just want to note that due to different state regulations, we're not allowed to have any kind of AI note takers or anything of that sort in the meeting. So if we do see any kind of AI note takers, we will remove them from the meeting. But just know that this is being recorded, so you will be able to reference the recording and the slide deck at a later time. Also, just to know that there is the raise hand function, the little hand icon. So once we get to the question and answer session, you can use that. And finally, just to note that there is a chat function in sort of the lower right-hand corner, the little quotation box. You can feel free to put questions and comments into the chat. Again, we're probably going to hold until we address all of those questions until the end, but feel free to utilize that if you'd like. All right, I'm going to read the next couple of slides out loud for accessibility purposes. The first is our land acknowledgement statement, and that is that we acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choctaw Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nassau-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway-Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the lands and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. And you can find more information about the process of developing this land acknowledgement statement on our website, msac.org. Next is our equity and justice statement, and that is that the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. The vision of the Maryland State Arts Council is to play an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do that through our mission, which is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all of the people of Maryland. Next on the screen, you will see our pillars and goals that are associated with our current strategic plan, which we recently adopted. You will sense these goals throughout all of our work, and you'll probably notice many of them throughout our presentation today. And that is our pillars and goals are access, awareness, connection, equity, and leadership. Next, you will see this is our slide outlining our creative meeting. And these are just ideas to keep in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation today. And that is to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it will be heard, use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand. Hold one another accountable with care. Honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas. And balance speaking with listening. Just a couple more slides here. These are sort of advertisements of different things that we offer here at the Maryland State Arts Council. We have a lot of different professional development opportunities that we offer throughout the year. Those include info sessions like the one that you are at today. We also hold a lot of different topic-specific sessions, often with different presenters such as Maryland Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts and different organizations that talk about specific topics that would be of interest to both independent artists and organizations. We've also recently kind of restarted our Coffee with the Council sessions. These are kind of informal chats and gatherings that happen online, typically on Tuesday mornings. Just an opportunity to gather our staff, some of our council members, and also anyone who is interested in joining in on that conversation. We also hold office hours. These are in-person events throughout the state where our staff go out into to different events and different settings to hold opportunities to meet with individuals. We have quite a few of these coming up, actually. I know that I'm going to be in St. Mary's County. I know that there's one that's going to be in Garrett County. There's a couple of different ones coming up in the next couple of weeks and months. You can find out about this and all of our events on our Eventbrite page. There's a link here on the screen. And lastly, just to call out that there are many different ways to get involved with the work of the Maryland State Arts Council. We're frequently looking for individuals to join us as panelists. And panelists work with program staff to review and score different applications throughout the year. Sometimes we also utilize editors, which actually we're going to be talking about editors quite a bit in today's presentation, as they were a part of the revision process of the GFO program. I'm not sure actually if there are any panelist calls open at the moment, but there will be soon. So do check out our ways to get involved page on our website. All right, so here we are at today's agenda. Like I said, we have a lot of information to share with you today. So we're going to start with just a review of the Grants for Organizations program and what that is. And then we're going to go through the eligibility guidelines of who is eligible to apply for that type of funding. Then here in bold with an exclamation point, you're going to see the revision process. We're going to really talk about this, this whole process, a year-long process that we went through to revise this program. And we're going to talk about what came out of that. Then we'll share a little bit about the GFO timeline and the next steps in that process. And we'll also go through the actual intent to apply application and what that includes. We'll talk about the funding formula and how that works in the GFO program. And we'll also do just a brief overview of Smart Simple, which is our grants platform. And like I said, hopefully at the end, we will have some time for questions and answers. Hopefully we'll answer your questions throughout, but of course, we'll do our best to answer those at the end as needed. All right, and with that, I am going to pass it over to Emily to give us a GFO overview.
Great, thanks so much, Laura, and good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Emily Sollenberger, Program Director here at the State Arts Council with Laura. I see a lot of familiar names, but also some new folks. I'm so glad you all could join us today. To start, we're going to go through a quick overview of the Grants for Organization program. As Laura said, we call it GFO for short. Just to kick us off, this presentation is really, as Laura mentioned, an overview of the intent to apply application only, along with the revision process as well. So we're going to hold another information session that's similar to this next week, and we'll also have some upcoming information sessions around the full application that will be held later in the fall in September, and then probably one in October. So just an FYI, that's kind of where we're at today. So if you're a new organization looking to join the program for the first time, you're in the right spot. So a quick overview of the purpose of the program. Really, the Grants for Organization program is to provide general operating support for our organizations across the state. So really to support and strengthen the infrastructure across Maryland. In FY26, our current fiscal year, we just started sending out notifications of about $18 million to 305 organizations across the state. So that's really exciting. This is our biggest program that we have here at the State Arts Council. A couple of things to just mark on your calendar as we move through the program or through today's presentation. You're going to hear these dates a few times, but it's important to write them down because you don't want to miss these deadlines. So if you are a new organization coming into the program, meaning you did not receive FY26 support from the GFO program, you must submit an intent to apply by Monday, September 15th, by the end of the day. And that would be in Smart Simple, which we'll go over in a little bit. And then moving forward, if you are eligible to move forward into the program, along with our other organizations that have been in the program, you'll need to submit a full application by Saturday, November 15th, by the end of the day. If you're applying for intent to apply, so one of those new organizations coming into the program, you will be notified after that application deadline if you are accepted into the program to move forward with another application. We'll also note here too that Laura and I typically work 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, so we can provide technical assistance during that time. We try to keep the same deadlines year over year, so that's why sometimes things fall on a Monday, sometimes they fall on a Saturday. We're not available on Saturdays for technical support, so we just want to be mindful of our time and your time as you're planning ahead. So just note the technical assistance availability. So I started to get into this a little bit already, but if you are a returning applicant, meaning you received an award notification just recently for FY26 funding, you've already been accepted into the GFO program and do not need to complete an intent to apply. You'll move straight to the November 15th application deadline. If you're here today and you're in the program and you just want to listen, that's amazing. We're happy to have you, but just note you do not need to complete that intent to apply if you're in the program already. So for our new applicants, meaning you've never received grants for organization funding or recently did not receive FY26 GFO award, you are required to submit an intent to apply application due September 15th. And then again, if you're accepted into the program, then you would need to apply for a full application November 15th. If you're a new organization that does not submit an intent to apply or wasn't approved, you will not be able to submit a full application for FY27 funding. And if you're just not sure, you can reach out to Laura and myself, and we'll be able to talk through kind of those next steps with you. So moving into eligibility and who can apply, arts organizations can apply for general operating support. So we're looking at those nonprofit organizations whose purpose is producing or presenting the arts through public program or services. So again, applicants must be arts organizations or organizations whose mission or purpose is producing or presenting the arts through public programs or services, such as arts museums, orchestras, galleries, theaters, art centers, etc. We also have a category called arts program. So these are organizations whose primary purpose is other than producing or presenting the arts, but they have ongoing public art activities through public programs. So the mission of these organizations might not be specifically dedicated to the arts, but you do have ongoing arts programming on a regular basis that's offered to the public. So these organizations are considered non-arts organizations for our purposes. So examples might be community centers, places of worship, non-art museum, libraries, or universities. So they have a larger kind of scope organization or institution, but have a significant arts program that we would recognize within the GFO program. So some eligibility criteria here, just to be brief, our organizations or programs must be a 501c3 nonprofit or a unit of government or school. You can be fiscally sponsored if you're an organization that does not have that status, but you might have a fiscal sponsor. If you're not sure what that is, then you probably are not in this particular agreement. But if you are fiscally sponsored, we'd be looking for those relationships to have a Model A agreement. And if you're not sure, just be in touch with us about that too. The organization must be incorporated in Maryland as a nonprofit or have significant physical presence in Maryland. You must have operated as an arts organization or arts program for at least one full fiscal year, and you must be able to submit a financial statement for your most recently completed fiscal year at the time of application. So for example, this year we would be looking for financial statements that would be for FY25, so ending June 30th if you're on the traditional fiscal year, or calendar year 24. So those are the kind of financial aspects there. New this year, which is part of the revision process, which we'll go through in a bit. In the past, you must have an allowable income number of $50,000 or more. We decreased that to $10,000 this year. So if you have at least $10,000 of allowable income, so that would mean your contributed income sources, earned revenue sources, and otherwise kind of operating income must be $10,000. So we'll talk about how that aligns with those of you who might have been in the Creativity Grant Program previously. Okay, so what can the GFO funding support? It can support general operations. So this is not a project-specific grant. It's really to support that ongoing programming and operations of your organization. So it's really flexible funding. So you do not need to have really specific expenses. It just is there to be flexible and help with your operations throughout the year. So what those allowable expenses might include would be your programming materials and supplies, marketing and promotional activities, paying your personnel, your staff, your contractors, and any of those associated expenses with, payroll and those sorts of things. Operations such as a mortgage or rent, your utilities, internet, any professional development activities. So really, it's kind of the core of your programming and operations throughout the year. What it can't support are a few things that run across most of our programs, and that's re-granting and scholarships. So that kind of pass-through money is not allowable. Anything having to do with capital improvements or renovations, activities that are not open to the public, or activities that are primarily therapeutic, any travel outside the state, and with all of our grant funds cannot be used for any political contributions. And if you're not sure, just ask us. We'll be happy to walk through that. Okay, so that's kind of the basics to set us up. I'm going to hand it over to Laura to go through kind of the revision process and what's next for FY27.
Great, thanks, Emily. All right, here we go, the revision process. So the GFO program is, as Emily said, it is our largest funding program. It's kind of our flagship funding program for the Maryland State Arts Council, and it has been for many years. It last underwent a rather significant editing process for the full program back in 2018. Some of you might remember that. And there was also a revision in the funding formula in 2021. For many, many years, the GFO program has included multiple steps and has had a 3-year cycle. So those steps included an intent to apply application for new organizations. There were 2 different applications with different deadlines. We called them the on-year and off-year, which if you've been a part of the GFO program, you're familiar with that. The on-year application was the really large process, and those applications were reviewed by public panelists. Those on-years typically happened every 3 years, and then in the in-between years, you would complete a shorter application known as the off-year. The on-year included the submission and the review of a rather lengthy written application. It also included an artistic site visit, an in-depth conversation. Those were both conducted by panelists, and everything sort of culminated in a panel meeting that was held in the springtime, where the result was a panel percentage score that every application came to. Additionally, the staff, which have for the past couple of years have been myself and Emily, we reviewed all of the applications, and we have also reviewed all of the financial statements. And there's also a final report that is associated with all of the GFO applications that's due every summer. It's due tomorrow, August 15th, for anybody who is a part of it currently. There's just a reminder there. So kind of concurrently with the GFO program, there's also then the Creativity Grant program. Many of you that are listening to this, you might have applied to or received funds from the Creativity Grant program over the past couple of years. There was that change that moved the general operating funds for some organizations, for our smaller organizations, to the Creativity Grant program. That started in FY19, and then it's currently running through FY26. So the organizations that were not funded through the GFO program, either because they didn't apply, weren't approved, or weren't eligible, were receiving general operating support, possibly through the Creativity Grant program. The Creativity Grant, it has a very different application process throughout the year than the GFO program. So the Creativity Grant, it has, you can apply right now within the fiscal year on a rolling basis. That's generally been from the summer, from July through the spring, generally March. Applications have been reviewed and awarded monthly for up to $4,000. Last year, we were able to increase that to $5,000, but it's come back down to $4,000 for this year. And those applications are reviewed by public panelists. It's a relatively short application in comparison to the current GFO program, with just 3 narrative questions, and it asks for a financial statement from the last completed fiscal year. And additionally, it also has a final report that is required as well. So those are kind of the 2 components that we were looking at through this GFO editing process. So as I kind of mentioned a moment ago, Emily and I have been on staff since 2019, and we've overseen both the GFO program and the Creativity Grant since then. Based on many years of experience of working with these programs and feedback that we've collected from applicants, from grantees, from panelists, from our colleagues, ourselves, we recommended a public editing process throughout FY25 to address some persistent issues that we were really noticing. And that included that there was just an inherent nature of panelist subjectivity through the GFO review process. We have a really extensive panelist training that we go through that includes bias training and things like that to really make sure that we are doing our very best to eliminate subjectivity. But there is just an inherent human nature element that comes with panelist reviews. So we noticed that. And we noticed that there were variances in scoring because of that. And that would be from year to year, from panel to panel, from person to person, that we were just noticing that was cropping up more and more. We started to really ask what is essential in the process to provide support to grantees. This was kind of the overarching question of our process. What do we really need to know to get funding to grantees? And we also really thought about just the fact that there has been substantial growth in the GFO program and the Creativity Grant program. And that growth means that there's more demands and more needs, both needs for the general operating support as other funding sources have diminished. And then that means that there's a growing demand for technical support for applying organizations. So that means us, our staff time, our capacity. And there's also a significant amount of management and support that we provide to panelists as well, and just the logistics of how that runs and how we support them as well. So we decided to enter into this GFO editing process basically this time last year. That editing process was pretty extensive and lasted basically the duration of FY25. So we started with a public call for editors at about this time last year. From that public call, we selected 10 individuals with really varied levels of experience and backgrounds and expertise. And they were generally all associated in some way with the GFO program. So they were fairly familiar with it, either as a funded organization or a previous panelist. And they were selected to review our materials and to develop policy recommendations. Basically, at the same time, we also surveyed our current GFO grantees. We received 51 responses, which is a pretty good response rate. And we used that feedback to also help shape our policies. As we moved into last fall, Emily and I did a lot of research with the staff at the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, NASA for short, and we compiled a lot of research about national trends and best practices when it comes to general operating support and panel review processes. We conducted 3 editor meetings last fall in October and November. So those 10 editors, they came together for staff-guided conversations about the issues and about the policies that we were considering. And in between those meetings, we had the editors complete what we called homework, which was a lot of reading and research and working through their own thought on these questions. And the group came to a consensus of ideas and recommendations to work towards. After we completed those editor meetings, we moved into public listening sessions. We held 2 of them in February and had over 110 people join us. Many of you were probably there. We shared these editor recommendations, and overall we heard really positive feedback with general agreement on the proposed changes. So from there, we took all of these ingredients together, and Emily and I worked together to develop recommendations. We consulted with staff and made sure that we kept our council apprised of the work throughout all of this. And then it landed with a presentation to committee and council last May and June, and the council approved all of our changes. So the topics that we really asked the editors to consider during this process, we had 3 major topics that kind of drove all of the revisions. The first was asking what is essential in the GFO process to provide funding to these arts organizations. The second was, should there be a role for the public, such as a panelist or some other kind of reviewer role in that process? And then the third was, building off of those 2 points, is there just a new GFO structure entirely to consider? So these 3 questions really drove our revision process, and the results are in the new process that we're going to share with you today. What we heard from our editors, and I'll just kind of summarize these, is that regarding the application, there's general information that they felt is important to know about the organization, meaning your mission, your vision, your programming, just kind of that basic information. But there was overall consensus that significant application changes were needed to that big on-year full application, which is a very lengthy 14 narrative questions, big process. So there was the need, the recommended changes were to really significantly edit that. Also, there was a suggestion to add some elements to the application, including goals and benchmarks set by the organization within the application. And the financials and the organizational attachments in the application that the editors felt could remain the same. They did not have any significant changes for that. Regarding the public role, there was a general feeling that, yes, there is a role for the public. These are public dollars, and it felt like involving the public was an important aspect of this process. However, there were concerns with that consistency of panelists and their reviews from year to year. So that was the kind of the thought process there. We considered, so when you bring all of these together, the overall editor's recommendations was to really think about a compliance model, looking at the compliance and eligibility of organizations, and also having artistic visits that are associated with a public panelist role. And we'll talk about that later. There was the overall consensus of removing panel meetings and scoring elements from the process. And there was also the consideration of a new cycle structure to just account for the number of organizations and the number of panelist visits that were required from year to year. So that is a whole lot of information. That basically is the background to getting to what we're going to present here, which is the first step in the GFO process, the intent to apply application, which Emily is going to walk through.
Great, thanks again, Laura. And yeah, like you said, this is a lot of information to digest, especially if you're not familiar with the GFO program to start with. So, you know, we're here to help walk you through that. But moving forward into the intent to apply application, what came out of kind of that revision process regarding the application was, you know, to shorten the application itself, but to include a little bit more information in the intent to apply process. So we're learning up front a little bit more about these new organizations coming into the program. So that way, moving forward, if you're accepted and in the program, you have a shortened application while you're in their cycle year to year. So upfront, you know, the intent to apply where it was a little bit shorter is now a little bit more extensive. So I'm going to kind of look at this, but really the intent to apply application is primarily focused on eligibility and compliance of your organization. So again, if your intent to apply is approved, this does not guarantee funding at this point, but it simply means you're invited to then complete that full application to then be considered for funding. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. So again, the intent to apply process has a little bit more in-depth application than the previous process. The full application, if invited to submit, is significantly shortened from the previous version. And our goal here is really to get details, again, concerning your organization's eligibility and compliance up front through the intent to apply, and then move to that streamlined full application process. So some things that you'll be asked to submit within the intent to apply is some organizational information. So that includes a unique entity identifier, or UEI, which is required upon the submission of your application. This is taking the place of the former DUNS number that many of you might be familiar with. So instead of a series of numbers, it's a series of letters and numbers. And this is coming from the federal government. So since we receive federal funding, it's passed to our grantees. So it's just something as a nonprofit you would, if you're not already registered, you might want to look into doing that sooner rather than later. You will also be required to send us the 501c3 determination date and your IRS letter of determination as an attachment. And then I mentioned it earlier, but if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you'll need to include that information and proof of a Model A relationship. Then there's also moving into kind of more general information and these eligibility questions throughout the intent to apply application. Many of them are yes or no or drop down fields that will then spur additional information. But to start, we will ask you about your artistic category that most accurately characterizes the work of your organization. Again, there'll be a drop down selection of disciplines that you select that would most connects with the work that you do. We ask, has your organization operated for one full fiscal year? And you'll say yes or no to that. And then we ask, does your organization have a mission, vision, and stated goals or values? And this is a yes or no. If you select yes, you'll be asked to state your organization's mission, vision, and any goals and values. Moving along, we'll then ask, does your organization have ongoing programs to produce or present the arts to the public? And again, this is a yes or no. And if you select yes, you'll need to upload a list, no more than 2 pages, of all your public programming that has occurred in the last completed fiscal year. So in your response, we asked you to include a brief description of each type of program or event. So this might include kind of these buckets of programming. So for example, if you have a main stage season, an exhibition series, educational programming, you don't need to list every single event, but really thinking about those kind of general programming buckets that you might have as an organization throughout the year. And then we'll ask and who the programming events are serving, so meaning your community and audiences. If an activity is tuition or fee-based, such as a summer camp or classes, something that has a fee associated to maybe a closed group, we'll ask you to describe how that activity is serving the community beyond those that are paying to participate. So that's a lot to put in 2 pages. So if you have questions there, just reach out to us. Moving along, we'll also ask, are you applying as an arts organization? So that means those organizations that where your mission and programming are entirely arts-based, or for an arts program. So I mentioned early on that if you're an arts program, that might be that you have significant arts programming under a non-arts kind of institution or organization. So that might be, again, a program of a college or a university, or a program of a larger entity. So if you are an arts program, we'll ask that you briefly describe your ongoing public arts-based programming and the structure and relationship with your parent organization. And when we mean parent organization, that just means that larger entity that your program falls under. We'll also ask, is your organization incorporated in Maryland or have a significant physical presence in Maryland? And if yes, we'll ask that you describe your organization's geographic area of service and include specific details regarding the communities, counties, cities, or statewide areas that you're serving. Moving along, in connection with geographic area of service, we are asking that you identify the percentage of programming serving the community other than tuition paying constituents. So again, this would be just including that general percentage of activities that would be free activities, along with activities that are open to the public to attend that may be free or paid opportunities. And we have here kind of in italics what tuition paying includes, and that's programming with a fee or service model, such as classes, camps, workshops, etc., that may be intended for a very specific or closed group of people and not open to the general public. There's a drop down of like 4 choices of percentages. So you just pick the general percentage of the programming that is essentially open to the public for folks to participate in. Moving along here, we will then ask, does your organization have a board of directors or another type of governing body? If yes, we'll ask that you describe the role of the board within your organization, and within your response, describe how the makeup of the board is reflective of your organization's geographic area of service. So again, that's why we ask about the geographic area of service early on as a reference point here as well. We ask that you tell us about your organizational structure, and you would click all the groups that apply to your organization. So those groups are here below in the bullet point list here So that would include a board of directors or officers or another type of governing body. If you have paid staff members, either full-time, part-time, or contractual, and if you have a group of volunteers, whether they be staff or committees, however volunteers show up for you within your organization structure. And then we'll also ask that you upload a graphic chart of your organization's staffing structure and include board, staff, artists, volunteers, generally the makeup of your organization staff structure in more of a chart or visual form. And then here we're asking about kind of your long-term planning. So we asked, does your organization have a long-term or strategic plan? This is a yes or no question, and whichever question, however you're answering, there is a request for more information. So if you click yes, that you do have a long-term or strategic plan, we ask that you describe the priorities of the long-term or strategic plan, and within the response include some specific goals and benchmarks of your plan. If you do not have that, we ask that you do describe your organization's long-range plans or future vision for the organization, describe how your goals are established. If your organization does not have a long-range plan or future vision or goals, or any of those kind of future forward aspects, indicate that as such in that area as well. Okay, then moving into, so all those questions were connected to kind of more general information about your organization. And then the last few are here around kind of financial questions and information. So we ask, is your organization's total allowable income for FY25 or calendar year 24 at least $10,000? And we give kind of both of these options because it's really dependent on how you operate as an organization, what your fiscal year is. Generally, we see folks with a June 30th end date or a calendar year December end date. There are a few organizations that operate with a slightly different fiscal year, but either way, we'll be looking at your last completed fiscal year. And we'd be looking for income that is at least $10,000. And I'll just note that within our guidelines, it does state kind of some general buckets of income that would be considered allowable, and then those that would be considered non-allowable. Most of your operating income generally is allowable income, but there are a few things like in-kind income or capital renovation income, kind of these specialized things that would be considered non-allowable. We also ask, will your organization have an authorized financial statement for its most recently completed fiscal year, so FY25 or calendar year 24, at the time of the application? And this is really at the time of the November 15th application deadline. So, and there's also a note here, if your organization has allowable income over $750,000, an audited financial statement will be required as part of the full application. If not, another general kind of statement is fine. So if you click yes, you would upload your organization's financial statement at the intent to apply time, showing both income and expenses. So this, again, this could be a profit and loss statement, something that is showing your income and expenses for the last completed fiscal year, and that is authorized by somebody from your organization. And then finally, we ask that you list the dates of your most recently completed fiscal year. And then we also ask, does your organization have established procedures or financial oversight, which would include kind of monitoring, approving your organization's finances and annual budgeting process? And again, if you click yes, you'll be asked to describe the procedures for monitoring and approving those organizations' finances and the process for developing and approving the annual budget. And then that's the end of the intent to apply, and then you'll sign it electronically, just really typing in information about your authorizing official's name and associated information. So that's a lot for an intent to apply. If you've done this before, or if you've submitted other intent to applies, they tend to be much shorter. But again, we're kind of front loading the information in this process. So then once you're in the program, you'll have a shortened application. So now I'm going to hand it over to Laura to go through some more next steps here.
Great, thanks, Emily. And I just want to acknowledge, I know there are a few questions in the chat. We'll get to those at the end if we don't already, address them throughout the next couple of slides. So just acknowledging we see them there, we will get to them. So looking at what's next in this process. So again, I know we've said it a couple of times, but the intent to apply application, it is due this year on Monday, September the 15th. At the end of the day by 11:59 within Smart Simple. After that September 15th deadline, Emily and we go through all of the applications to determine final eligibility. Do know that, if we have questions or we need additional information or we're not clear on something, we will reach out to you. So just, maybe keep an eye on your email or anything like that. If we need additional information, we will reach out to you. And we'll very clearly say when we need to have that information by. You'll be notified by early October if you are accepted to move forward into the full application. And that full application, which, as Emily said, is much shorter than the previous GFO application, that will be due on November the 15th. If you're not approved to move forward, we will suggest some other programs that might be a better fit for you at this time. So there are other options to consider if GFO just isn't the right fit at this time. So starting with this FY27 application cycle, all GFO applicants will complete the same application every year. So previously, we've said this in a couple different ways, but previously there were on-year and off-year applications, and those had different deadlines. So all GFO applications moving forward will be due on November 15th of each year. We keep that same deadline, like Emily said, even if it's on a weekend or anything like that, it's always due on November the 15th. In addition to the eligibility and compliance requirements, which largely were answered through the intent to apply application, the application is now going to focus on updates about the organization from the past fiscal year. So those updates, that generally includes any kind of significant changes to the organization, such as changes to the mission, vision, or goals, changes in staffing or leadership, any significant changes in operations or programming or other artistic activities, or any significant changes in your finances. So within the full application, it will ask about those kinds of changes. Organizations will also be asked to share up to 5 goals or priorities of the organization for the next 5 years. These can be short-term goals or long-term goals. The goals and priorities, they might include goals associated with things like capacity building, financial goals, board and staff development, programmatic development, different kinds of audience or community engagement, new initiatives that you might be launching, things like that you're really working towards as an organization. The idea here is that these stated application goals are later going to connect to the final report and any kind of future staff conversations that we have with the organization. So that way it's kind of like a full circle. So that way we're able to look at what you're stating in the application and then the updates to it within the final report. So we mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the revision process. In the past, panelists were asked to both review and score all of the written on-year applications. The panelists also conducted what we called extension assignments. And those extension assignments included both the artistic activity visit, so essentially a site visit where they're going to see programming at your organization. And they also hosted what we called in-depth conversations with the applicants, which were sort of, we didn't like to use the term interview, but kind of an interview type style conversation where they're talking about different questions to clarify the application. All of that work culminated in a panel meeting where the final score of each applicant was discussed amongst the panelists and was then determined for each organization. So panelists will still be involved in the review process, but it's going to be in a slightly different way. Panelists are going to review but not score written applications, and they're also going to complete the artistic activity visits. MSAC staff, meaning myself and Emily, we're going to review but also not score the written applications, and we're going to complete the in-depth staff conversations. So we're kind of taking that element from the extension assignments and just shifting it to us conducting those conversations instead. With these changes also comes a change in the review cycle. So the artistic activity visit and the staff conversation elements of the review process, they're going to each occur once every 4 years in a rotating schedule. So an example of what this schedule would look like would be something like, in the first year, you might complete the application and the artistic activity visit. Year 2 would be the application only. Year 3 would be the application and the staff conversation, and year 4 would be the application only. And that would just cycle through every 4 years. Obviously, not everybody's going to start at year 1. You're going to, depending on your artistic discipline, you will start at one of these 4 levels and then cycle through, just depending, which is pretty similar to how the on and off years worked before. If you're a new organization coming into the GFO program, so meaning anyone who completed the intent to apply and was invited to then complete the full application, you will complete both the artistic activity visit and the staff conversation in your first review cycle. Following that, if you're approved for GFO funding, you would then fall into cycle just depending on your artistic discipline. And we'd of course let you know where you fall within that cycle. So how that all kind of plays out within the timeline, again, we'll say it one more time here. The intent to apply is due on September the 15th. By early October, you will be notified about your intent to apply application. In October and November, the GFO application itself will be open within Smart Simple. So if you've been invited to complete that, you would be working on that in October and November, with the GFO application deadline being November 15th. In the winter time, that's when the panelists would be assigned to your application, depending on where you fall in the cycle for review. At that same time, we, the staff, would also be reviewing your application and your financials. Through January through April, so we have a fairly large period of time, much longer than the previous time for extension assignments. From January through April, the panelists and the staff will complete those artistic site visits and the in-depth conversations, just depending on where you fall in the cycle, or if you're a new organization, you would be getting both of these in that period of time. And then sort of the wrap up of how all of this works is in May and June, Emily and I, we present our recommendations for funding to our committees and our council, and the grant amounts, they're determined based on our budget. So we have to go through a lot of math depending on our budget that we receive. And then after those approvals, once we officially move into the new fiscal year after July 1st, that's when the notifications of all GFO grants are sent via Smart Simple. Throughout that whole process, we are here to answer questions, to provide support. We're happy to meet with staff and board. We're also happy to attend programs and events, just as things come up for your organization. Particularly this year, we're going to be hosting a lot more of info sessions and different kinds of office hours and things like that, just to make sure everybody's clear about this transition. We know it's a really big process, so we want to make sure that's really clear. And then additionally, final reports, if you are approved for that funding, they are due on August the 15th of every year. That's one of those dates that just remains consistent every single year. They're due on August 15th. All right, so moving forward here to the funding formula and how that works, Emily's going to walk through that process.
Great, thanks, Laura. The funding formula is really exciting. So a lot of this has to do with kind of more background information for Laura and I, but we like to be really transparent about how we determine funding. And again, we've been going back and forth of like what we previously did and then what's going to happen moving forward. So on this screen right now is how we've been using our funding formula to determine funding in the past. So we're really have been looking at 3 different variables, and you hear us say total allowable income a lot. You've heard it today a lot. That's really important because that's part of the funding formula. So that is the first variable. The second variable we've been using is the panel score. So as we've talked about, that's been determined when an organization goes through their on-year or that panel review process every 3 years to come up with a panel score. And that score stays with an organization for the 3-year cycle. And then there's a cap allocation percentage that really is determined by our state budget and then the GFO allocation each year. And then there's another layer that there's 5 different cap allocations determined by the tier that you fall in. The tier is associated with your budget. So you can see at the top in bold that we've really just multiplied those 3 variables together. So total allowable income times panel percentage times your cap allocation percentage to get your grant award. An example here is at the bottom that if you have $500,000 in income, a 90% panel score, and say a 7% cap allocation percentage for the year, your award might look like $31,500. So moving forward after that revision process, essentially we're taking out the panel percentage score that was received during that panel review that ended, with all the different pieces that we've talked about here. So what it comes down to is that we're moving into a funding formula that is only including 2 variables. So that is the total allowable income, again, that really important part of the financials that you'll be including, and the cap allocation percentage. So really simplifying things on our end and for you as well. Then moving along, so as part of that formula, that cap allocation percentage that I mentioned that's associated with our budget every year, and then it's also the 5 different cap allocation percentages are based on budget size. So what we do is we kind of divide our organizations by your allowable income number, and this happens each year. So, we've seen some folks kind of toggle between different tiers, and it really just depends on what your financial statement looks like from that last year. So our smallest organizations would be in tier 1. They've been 50,000 to 500,000. And then tier 2 has been 500,000 to 1.5 million. Tier 3, 1.5 to 5 million. Tier 4 is 5 million to 10 million, and tier 5 is 10 million plus. So those last 2 tiers are, kind of our largest organizations there. We are moving into year 4 of 5 of a transition period that started in FY24, where we've kind of been rolling out this equitable funding formula and this idea of different cap allocation percentages. So we've seen kind of a shift in our goals and priorities with this funding formula and how this cap allocation percentage impacts our smallest organizations all the way to our largest. So I think in the next slide, it kind of moves through what this equitable funding formula will look like moving forward, kind of keeping our previous goals in mind during this transition period, but also removing that panel percentage moving forward. So again, looking at just the allowable income number and the cap allocation percentage moving forward, starting in FY27. There are a couple of these priorities that we're looking at as we're looking at the cap allocation percentages. The first thing to start is that we've been moving through a transition of cap amounts for one organization not being able to get higher than a certain amount of grant award. So moving into year 4, no one organization could get an award of 1.1 million, and by the following year, we'll end with nobody being able to get more than $1 million in a particular year. There's some transition priorities that we've been using and trying to align these percentages with. So tier 1, which is our smallest organization, we've been trying to be mindful of increasing your cap allocation percentage at a faster rate during this transition period. Tier twos are slightly larger organizations, so increasing the cap allocation steadily over 5 years. Tier three are kind of our mid-size organizations. We want to keep them stable during this transition time, so there's not a lot of up and down with that cap allocation, really just kind of maintaining. And then tiers 4 and 5, those are our largest organizations. Our goal is to decrease their cap allocation, but not at a rate that's greater than 1.5% annually year over year during this kind of 5-year transition. So those are just some priorities that we've been looking at. And really this has to do with how all the numbers fall from any given year. So for example, this year we had to do kind of take a detour, just given our budget and some other variables. But ultimately, this is our goal, is to increase the cap allocation percentage for our small organizations and decrease for our larger organizations in this equitable funding formula. So in an effort to kind of stabilize and maintain our grant awards over the next 3 years, by removing that panel percentage, we don't really want to upset the whole pool of our grantees and all the awards. So what we've decided to do is kind of transition or phase out the panel percentage over the next 3 years. So you can kind of see what this schedule looks like visually, but if you're an organization that received 90% in FY26, we'll round up your score to 100%. So essentially removing it from the formula at that point. If your organization scored, say, in the 80s, we would round you up to a 90, and then the following year round you up to 100 and removing the score. And then finally, if you were an organization that received somewhere in the 70s, you'd be rounded up to 80 this year, 90 the following year, and then finally 100. So again, it's just kind of a phase out schedule here to just maintain and stabilize our organizations over 3 years by removing this pretty significant variable. And then moving forward, if you're a new organization, I'll backtrack a minute. If you're a new organization coming into the program, you don't really need to worry about the phase out schedule necessarily. But if you are a new organization coming in at a larger level, say you're at a tier 4 or tier 5. So if you're an organization that's over $5 million who's coming in as a new organization into the GFO program, we will have what we are calling a phase-in process for the funding formula to, again, ensure that kind of budget stability from a different perspective. And it's the same idea here as that phase-out schedule. It's looking at a 70%, 80%, and 90% eligibility of funding over the next 3 years as you come into the program. But again, this would only be for those largest organizations. So if you're an organization that's under $5 million, you don't need to worry about this schedule at all. This is really just so we can be transparent with the folks that that this might impact. Another piece of the puzzle that came out of the revision process is that there's some shifts in the match requirements for the GFO program. Previously, all GFO grants had been required 3-to-1 match in cash. So this would exclude any funds or services from the state or in-kind contributions. So this is really something that Laura and I check in the final report, just to make sure you have 3 times the income of your grant award, essentially. Moving forward, the match requirements are going to change based on your organization's tier in the GFO program. So if you're one of our smaller organizations at tier 1 or tier 2, so you're an organization that has less than $1.5 million in total allowable income, your match would be a 1-to-1 match moving forward. So that's really where the shift comes in. Our organizations that are those larger organizations over 1.5 million, those tier 3, 4, and 5, you must match the GFO funds at that 3-to-1 cash match. So that's going to be the same. And again, funds or services from the state of Maryland, in-kind contributions or donated services may not be used as part of the match. Again, you don't really need to do anything additional here. It's something that Laura and I check at the final report when we're looking at your financials at that time. We just want to be transparent about this part too. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Laura to talk a little bit about the transition from creativity to GFO.
All right, we're in the home stretch here. So with all of these changes to the GFO program also comes changes to the Creativity Grant program. So I think many of you that are listening here over the past few years, the smaller organizations back in like FY18, FY19 transitioned out of the GFO program to this new program that was called the Creativity Grant program. The intention of the Creativity Grant was always that we wanted to be able to provide a shorter, more accessible application for smaller organizations to be able to apply for MSAC funds. The Creativity Grant became an extremely popular program over the past couple years. So an unintentional consequence of this change was that because it became so popular, it became rather competitive. So in some cases, this actually unintentionally made it harder for smaller organizations to receive MSAC funding, which of course was not the intention of that change. So with the revision of the GFO program, we really thought about that Creativity Grant and where that fell into this process. And it has been decided that the Creativity Grant for general operating support will close permanently on December 31st of 2025. So that's FY26 support, the current fiscal year. That will be the last time to apply for general operating support through the Creativity Grant. The general operating support for all arts organizations and all arts programs will then be housed under the GFO program moving forward for FY27 and beyond. The Creativity Grant for project-based support will continue, so that's going to continue on. If you do not end up receiving general operating support through the GFO program, or if you're not eligible for the GFO program, you can still absolutely get project-based support through the Creativity Grant in the future. So what this timeline for the transition looks like, this is kind of an important one to really pay attention to, because as this transition happening, you're going to be looking at both FY26 support, the current year, through the Creativity Grant. And at the same time, you're also going to be looking at FY27 support through the new GFO program. So for this 1 year, there's going to be this little bit of an overlap while we, bring in the new GFO process and phase out the Creativity Grant program. So just know that up front. So right now, as of July 1st, the FY26 Creativity Grant for Gen Op support opened, and those applications, they're currently being accepted on a rolling basis with that monthly review process. As of about 2 days ago, the FY27 GFO intent to apply application opened. So that is now currently available. You can go to our website or go to Smart Simple, and you'll be able to see that GFO intent to apply for FY27 support. Again, on September 15th, the FY27 GFO intent to apply is due. And then in early October, you would find out about the FY27 GFO intent to apply. We'll send those notifications out. If you are invited to, submit the full application for FY27 support, that will be due on November the 15th. On December 31st of this year, that's going to be the last day that you can apply for FY26 support to the Creativity Grant for general operating support. At that point, that's when it's going to close permanently. And again, we've talked a little bit about this, but just to kind of put it in context with the creativity timeline, in the winter of 2026, that's when the FY27 GFO review process is happening. So that's when we're looking at your applications, those artistic activity visits are happening, the staff conversations are happening. That's happening throughout the winter and early spring of 2026. And then after July 1st of 2026, once we officially move into FY27, that's when the FY27 GFO notifications are sent. And then following that, if your organization is approved, you would officially be considered in the GFO program. So that's when that full transition happens, is once those FY27 notifications are sent. Unless otherwise notified, you would then at that point submit the GFO application annually as part of the GFO program. Again, there would be no creativity grant option for general operating support at that time. All right, hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot because we're looking at both FY26 and FY27 at the same time in this period of transition. If you have questions or you're confused about the fiscal years or anything like that, please do reach out to us. We can talk one-on-one about exactly what your timeline should look like. We just wanted to run through a couple of frequently asked questions here. I think probably most of these have been answered throughout the presentation, but just to say them out loud. One question that we get a lot is, I've received GFO funding for the current year, meaning FY26. Do I need to complete an intent to apply? The answer here is no, you do not. You are already considered a part of the program. Only new organizations or organizations that did not receive GFO funding for FY26 have to do that intent to apply process. Another question we get a lot is that I just have a one-time activity that needs support. Should I apply to GFO? The answer here is probably not. GFO funding, as we've said throughout the presentation, it's really about your ongoing general operations and programs. So if you have just a one-off event or something like that, there's likely another program, such as the Creativity Grant for project support, that would be a better fit for you. Do I need to submit an audit with my application? Emily went through this, but possibly. All organizations have to submit a financial statement from the last completed fiscal year. For those with income under $750,000, they can just submit a signed statement, such as a profit and loss statement. So something that might just come out of QuickBooks or whatever your accounting software is. It can just be a very simple profit and loss signed by your treasurer or your financial officer. Those with income over $750,000, you are required to submit a board-approved audit with your application. My organization's planned budget for the upcoming year is over $10,000. Can I apply for GFO funding? This answer is maybe, but keep in mind that the GFO program, what we're doing is we're looking back on your most recently completed fiscal year, so your actuals. So when determining the funding, we only review completed financials. We're not looking at a projected budget. If the total allowable income for the last fiscal year is under $10,000, you wouldn't be eligible for consideration in the GFO program. All right, just to run through, we're doing good on time here. Just to run through Smart Simple real quick, in case you are not familiar with this. Smart Simple is our grants portal, so that is where you will need to submit all of your applications, including the intent to apply. You can get there by going to marylandarts.smartsimple.com. As an applicant, you will need to register with Smart Simple to apply. So if you haven't already registered, what you would do is once you go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com, you would click on the register button, little blue button in the lower left-hand corner. And from there, a menu will pop up that will ask you some different questions about the type of applicant that you are. Chances are, if you are looking for the GFO funding, you would be applying as a nonprofit organization or something similar. And it will just ask for some contact information and other details about your organization. Once you log in using your email and your password, you would come to your dashboard, which would look something like this. And you would want to look for the opportunities section of your dashboard. On this example, it has a number 2 above it. There might be a different number just depending on which applications are open when you log in. So you want to look in that opportunities list. You want to look for the grants for organizations option, and then make sure that you are looking for, it's really the only one that's available at the moment, but next to the little blue apply now button, you want to look for the intent to apply, which there's an arrow pointing to it here. You'd want to click on that apply now button to open the application. It's going to look something along these lines. To begin the application, you want to click Save Draft. That's going to basically open the application for you. And from there, it basically walks you through the entire application. It's going to ask all of the yes or no questions that Emily went through earlier in the presentation. It will give you the narrative spaces to answer all of those questions. It will basically walk you through exactly where to put the different attachments and the different requirements that are needed for the application. The system does now auto save. That's a new feature over the past year or two. It did not in the past. We still recommend, just maybe routinely clicking save drafts just so you don't lose anything, but it does auto save throughout. And then, oh, I didn't say this, but let me just say that at the very end, there is a blue submit button. So once you are completely done and ready to go, you would want to click the blue submit button, and then you are done with your application. So just a few things to point out before we move into any questions. Again, we recorded today's session and it will be shared on the website shortly. We'll share this as a resource. We're going to repeat this session on Tuesday, August the 26th at 4:00 p.m. It's going to be the same exact content, but we know it was a lot to take in. So if you need a repeat or a refresher, or you want to share it with other individuals from your organization, please feel free to join us again on Tuesday, August the 26th at 4:00 p.m. And then moving into September, we will have sessions about the full application. So that first one is going to be on Tuesday, September the 9th at 11:00 a.m. We'll also do other sessions about the full application in October as well, once we get those intent to apply notifications out. So if you are accepted into that process, you can join us for one of those future sessions to really walk through the details of what comes next. And all of those, they will be available. If they're not already, they are available to sign up through our Eventbrite page, which is where you signed up for today's session. So I'm going to pause here and just have our email addresses up here. In case you do have questions, you can feel free to reach out to us at any time. We are more than happy to talk through questions, concerns, anything you're confused about, both for the Creativity Grant and the GFO program and the transition between. So with that, I'm going to pause here. And Emily, it looks like there's some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'll give you a breath.
Yeah.
And we'll try to go through some of these questions in the chat real quick. But if you have any additional questions that you'd like to vocalize, feel free to use that raise hand feature, and we'll call on you in order to, or just drop any things in the chat. I'll start with, I think it's Freya. Should DOJ rules about DEI play a role in how we express our mission and goals? For our purposes, no. We did not change anything at the State Arts Council, and while we do receive federal funding, we ran kind of that partnership agreement through our AAG's office, so we did not have to make any changes. So we don't expect you to make any changes either. But if you do have any questions about that in particular, we can also chat offline one-on-one. So feel free to reach out if you've got any concerns there. Larry asks, is grant income allowable for purpose of reaching that $10,000 threshold? Grant income is, yes, definitely allowable income. So that might come from federal grant sources, other state grant sources, foundations, any other granting. Allowable income might be corporate sponsorships or corporate foundation support. So yeah, generally any of those kind of grant and donation contributions would be considered allowable. Bob asked, what is an authorized financial statement? Is a QuickBooks statement of activity report acceptable, or do you need the most recent 990? Actually, Bob, yes, a QuickBooks statement of activity or a profit and loss statement that is signed by an authorized financial person from your organization. So whether that's your treasurer or if you've got a financial person on your board or your executive director, board president, whoever's authorized to sign off on your financial statements. So essentially, you can export that document and then have somebody physically sign it. We cannot accept 990s or 990 EZs as part of just kind of our requirements. So yes, a QuickBooks statement would just be fine. Josephine asked, can we use in-kind services for the one-on-one match? No, that is actually one thing you cannot use for the match. We're looking for cash match requirements. So if you've got any concerns or you want us to take a look at your financial statement in advance, we're happy to do that just to make sure you're meeting that one-to-one match requirement. And Liz, hi Liz. I'm worried that for organizations with income under 50,000, the tier 1 GFO cap formula will lead to smaller grant awards than the $4,000 operating creativity grant. Maybe Liz. And that's something that we can talk about with organizations one-on-one if you want to kind of play with the formula numbers. We think that the smallest organizations with the $10,000 cap or $10,000 threshold should be higher than the $4,000, but it's something we can chat through because the $4,000 in project-based support is still an option. So, to be fully transparent, if this seems like too much for you, too much for your organization, and you'd rather stay in creativity zone, that's totally fine. So we can have those conversations with those organizations that might fall in that $10,000 to $50,000 income threshold if there's any concern there. Let's see, Melina, can we apply for FY26 creativity grant for project-based funding along with FY27 GFO grant? We're going to apply. Yes. So, we kind of been focusing on general operating, and that the general operating application closes in December. You can, as somebody who's eligible for creativity, you can apply for either general operating or project. So if you don't get the general operating through creativity, you can absolutely apply for project. We tend to recommend the general operating track to our organizations if that's an eligible and good fit, because that funding is a little more flexible. But for whatever reason, if that doesn't work out, the project funding is available, and we can talk about that too if that's a better fit for you. More specifically, is MSAC grant income allowable for reaching? Yes. Our general operating funds. There are a couple of programs that are considered non-allowable, such as our capital grant program, or if you get special request funds, which was from a couple of years ago. That shouldn't be part of the mix here, but generally, if you received, like, say, a creativity grant in the past, and then you're applying for a GFO, that creativity grant is considered allowable income. And just to clarify, an authorized financial statement, that can be a statement out of QuickBooks, such as a statement of activity or a profit and loss statement, something that's showing your income and expenses from your last completed fiscal year. And the authorized part is really coming from somebody that's signing off who's authorized. So we're looking for a signature and a date on that statement, for example. Okay, and I see some hands raised. I know we've got 5 more minutes here. I think I saw Ray is the first one. Hi, Ray. And you're on mute.
Hi. So we've been an organization for a year and a half. The doors of our museum haven't been only opened in November of last year. We were doing programming prior to having the doors open, but as far back as the beginning of the last fiscal year, I didn't know if the opening date made a difference or how it makes a difference.
that, you know, having programming in a physical space versus programming in general that you might have been doing in the community, that can certainly, the community programming could certainly go towards that full year of programming. And that would need to be associated kind of with your last completed fiscal year financial statement. So we can certainly talk one-on-one about that, Ray. So as you're completing the intent to apply, let's take it offline. So just to make sure that we have a good sense of what's going on.
Okay,
But I
thank
think
you.
you should be fine based
All
on
right,
what I know. Thank you. And then I saw another hand. Liza? Yes, Liza.
Hi, thank you. I was just curious if those $4,000 program grants or project grants that are on a rolling month to base, monthly things can be done multiple times. Can you get, 5 different things covered in 5 different months in the same year?
So how it's set up now, the creativity grant, for example, you can only receive 1 grant per fiscal year as long as you're eligible to apply. So if you're looking at, general operating or project-based support for creativity, you can only submit 1 application and be funded once within a fiscal year. And then if you're moving into the GFO program, you would not be eligible for creativity moving forward if you receive GFO funds. We do have some other programs that you might be eligible, even if you get creativity funding or if you get GFO funding. We've got things like a touring grant and professional development. There's public art, there's arts and education. So some of those programs you would still be eligible for, and we can certainly talk one-on-one about your needs there and if you would be eligible for those programs too.
And then one quick question on the GFO grant. Do you require letters of support from elected government officials or a town or any other organizations?
Nope, we don't require any letters of support. Good question though. That comes up for a lot of other funders.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And we've got 2 minutes here. Is there anything else I missed in the chat or anybody else have any questions as we wrap? Okay. I know we shared a lot here, folks, so thanks for hanging with us for 90 minutes of a lot of us talking at you. But we hope it was helpful, and this is a really an exciting time for us and an exciting transition time that we think will be really good overall for our organizations across the state. So again, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to Laura or myself. We're here to help. And make sure you're fitting in the best program for your organization. So again, we'll be rolling out more information. Take a look at that intent to apply. It's open now, and we look forward to chatting with you further. But thanks again for being with us.